gentlemen, I hope that was an excellent intro to get you in the mood for our presentation. This is Why Can't We Be Friends? Making Drupal Play Nice with Content Authors.
Oh.
Well, that's problematic.
No, we're fine.
There we go.
It's just a slow slide.
Love it. My name is Danielle Lorette. Other than being your conference organizer, I am also a content strategist at Coldfront Labs. And I'm going to toss it to
I'm David Pascadori. I'm the CTO of Coldfront Labs and Spot Zero on Drupal.org.
Mm-hmm.
So.
You can do this one. Oh, hi,
Hey,
Solomon. It's been that kind of day.
Yeah.
All right, you go next with this one.
So a bit about Coldfront Labs. We build Drupal applications for higher education, government, enterprise, and small to medium-sized businesses across various sectors. We usually handle all kinds of sort of large-scale Drupal applications, and we do sort of full stack from hosting to application support.
So here's what we're not going to talk about today. Just because Drupal talks related to content authors sort of have a reputation for usually being about configuring your WYSIWYG editor. And that's not what we're going to be talking about today. If you are looking for that sort of talk, Suzanne from Evolving Web has an excellent one. And this is a really valuable topic. It's just not the one that we're going to be covering today. So if you were hoping to hear about WYSIWYGs, sorry, it's not going to happen.
Hopefully that wasn't an audible
But here's what we are going to talk about today. So our agenda is sort of broken down into 3 chunks. I'm going to cover the first 2. So the first is sort of Content Strategy 101. Some of us in this room are familiar with that term, some of us aren't, and some of us might have a misconception of what it is, so I want to define it and why it matters. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about content style guides, what they are and why they're important. And then I'm going to toss it over to Dave for...
We're talking about implementing it. So how to take all these ideas and then actually put them into a Drupal site so you can leverage all of these things to make the content authoring experience in your actual application better.
Perfect. So Content Strategy 101. Here is your fast and furious 10-minute introduction to content strategy. And the reason I want to define it is because of this tweet right here. So anyone know Christina Halverson? One person, hooray! She's like the mother of content strategy. She's it, really. She wrote the book Content Strategy for the Web. And this is a great little tweet that she posted sometime in the spring, which is Netflix was looking for a content designer, content strategist, UX writer, product writer. We don't really know what you are, but we know we need you. So we're just going to kind of reach out there and possibly look for a unicorn because even content strategy is having trouble determining exactly what it is. And there are lots of definitions that I work with, so I want to give you my definition so you know the vantage point that I come to content strategy with as a content strategist. So to me, content strategy is guiding the creation, delivery, and governance of useful and usable content. And to me, that's very different than content marketing. Content marketing is often marketing sizzle, content for the sake of content. We're going to drive users in by showing them this great thing. Content strategy to me is much closer tied to user stories and knowing your personas inside and out and make sure you're delivering the content that your users want first and foremost, rather than what your stakeholders or your organization thinks it needs to put out there from a promotional standpoint. I also like to think of content strategy as being very lean. Less is more in most cases. So we really look at content strategy as, look at why we are producing this content, what kind of content we're producing, how often we're doing it, who are we making the content for, how often does it happen, and what's next. Now I'm good.
Now you're good. Sorry.
I have lured some of you here with the promise of ska punk references. Raise of hands if that was a deciding factor for you.
Oh, there's one. There's a couple.
3, 4. That's more than Montreal. That's fantastic. So, confession, closeted punk ska fan. Not so much in high school. That was less closeted. It was just out there. I think content strategists and ska punk bands are kindred spirits, and this is why. We took really nerdy skills from high school and learned to apply them in another field. So you have your ska band, and you have a grade 10 student who's been assigned a trombone, but he really wants to rock, and he's like, I will make this work, right? I don't know how to play guitar, I don't know how to play drums, but I want to be in a band, so I'm going to be in a ska punk band. Content strategists are just like that, but we're a bunch of grammar and organizational nerds who learned how to infuse ourselves into the tech world. And guess what, guys? You need us really bad. So we're kind of kindred spirits. But what I mostly want to talk about today is the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is content. Christina Halverson, who I referenced just before, she wrote this seminal List Apart article in 2008. I strongly suggest you go looking for it. And it's literally called The Elephant in the Room, Why Does Nobody Care About Content? Because it's very strange that since the web has sort of been in its inception, we've been very focused on the technology, and then eventually we became very focused on UX. But nobody's talking about content. We're finally starting to. Things are changing. But if you go to the next slide, I know I'm breaking the cardinal rule of PowerPoint here, but if you could just focus on the blue section, this comes from the article, and I'll just read the blue. We, the people who make websites, we're rather quiet on the matter of content. The client can do it. Do you think it's a coincidence then that web content is, for the most part, crap? Content is the web, it deserves our time and attention. And the big thing I want to focus here is the client can do it. You can all think of web projects you've been on where you hire a firm to handle the development, you might hire a firm to do the design, and the internal client is the person who's just supposed to wrangle content. Content is an elephant. It's a massive, complex beast. So expecting somebody to just wrangle that without any understanding of it is really difficult. You can go to the next one. Things are getting better. DrupalCon this year had a content track. It was the first time that DrupalCon had a content track. That's really exciting. We've seen a lot of keynotes that are becoming focused on content, and content strategists are now becoming an integrated part of the web development process. So I think, personally, that's really awesome, but I'm obviously going to be biased. This picture is a representation of the work that I do every day. Raise your hand if you've seen the content strategy quad before. Yay, 3 hands. Okay, so you also may have seen a version of this about 2 years ago that was a circle. They updated it very recently. So this is the newest content quad. I'm going to talk you through it really quickly. You have the top of the quad, which is content design, and the bottom, which is systems design. And that distinguishing is important because as much as you can try to play with the things in content design, the things in the bottom in system design are usually workflows, people, corporate culture. So you can tweak the things up top, but unless you create change in the bottom of your quad, you're unlikely to have digital transformation. So digital transformation really happens in the lower part, and the smaller things that you can do usually happen in the upper part. I'll break down what they are a little bit more in a second. I'll let you know today's talk is really editorial, okay? Which kind of seems backwards because it's like, well, you just told me if I don't do the bottom one, then I can't do that. But you can do tiny little editorial things as an individual. They give you a tangible thing to move forward without upheaving everything. So editorial is really, how do we know that this is the right content? Experience is, what do our users need? So we're really looking at those user stories. Structure is your content engineering. So when you're really looking at content types, you might even be looking at API integrations, how things are talking to each other. And process is how will this content be maintained and created. So you're really getting into people, processes, and workflows. Good? All right, and I said the bottom, digital transformation, the top, timing your things. I think we're good. Last caveat to content strategy. Content strategy does not equal design. I have to play really nice with designers and UX experts, and I have to dabble in UX, but really design is a separate component. And this always happens when I walk into stakeholder meetings. Everybody wants to talk to me about fonts, and they want to talk to me about the layout of their pictures, and they want to talk about the size of their hero image, and I say, talk to the web designer, because those aren't things that I really have a lot of control on. They're things I can have a say in, but we really have to look at content in its rawest form when we're talking content strategy. So as I said, we tend to get wrapped up in the technical aspects of redevelopment projects, but really, next slide, everything the light touches is content. This is my one-off brand slide from my SCA reference. But this came out of Confab 2019, which is the big content strategy conference that happens each year. And it's so perfect, right? Everything that is public-facing on your website is content. However, very few people are going to see the back end of your website. Very few people are going to know what API calls you're making, what technology you're using, what CMS. All of those things can be fantastic and robust, and you might have spent lots of money on them, but if you haven't invested the time, budget, and effort into your content, none of those things are going to shine, because the only thing that has light shine on is the content that you produce. So, we get talking about the reservoir of goodwill. Who's heard this term before? Nobody. Ooh, fun. Okay, so this is from a book called Don't Make Me Think, early 2000s, Steve Krug, big name in UX. He talks about the reservoir of goodwill. So every time we enter into a website, we generally come in as happy users. We're like, okay, I'm going to go looking for the information that I need, and you feel great. However, everything on the website that pushes back against us decreases our reservoir of goodwill, and that's when we become frustrated users, and we're likely to bounce off of your site. So if you go to the next slide, things that will make our reservoir of goodwill go down are things like outdated content. You know, we're looking for when to register for an event, and then we notice, oh wait, this event is from 2017. I didn't really, why hasn't this been archived? Inconsistent content, so let's say you're looking at program pages at a school, and the nursing faculty has it structured one way, but I'm also considering human sciences, and then I look at it, it's laid out completely differently, and it's completely incongruent for me as a user. I'm seeing nodding, which makes me so happy when I present. Hiding information that the user wants, so you're purposely making them jump through your marketing sizzle. Stakeholders like to push for this. I want them to, they're gonna go looking for this, so let's put this and this in front of them so that I'm sure that they get promoted too. Lowers the reservoir of goodwill. They might give up halfway through because they can't find what they want. Annoying requests for information. One of my favorites is when you get that, would you participate in a user survey about your site experience, but it's the first time you've ever been to the site, okay? You don't have any user experience yet to come back. Or again, like I said, putting that marketing sizzle first and foremost. We all see those carousels, used to be so popular on the home pages. They satisfy stakeholders, not user stories. And that would be an example of, reservoir of goodwill going down, because I'm probably not gonna look at your carousel. I'm probably here to get information about a deadline, program, something like that. Okay? Things that fill up our reservoir of goodwill are up-to-date content that answers my user needs, making sure I know my user stories in and out, and that they're built into the navigation, the IA, that they're readily available, maybe that they're sticky, they're in a card area, that I can get to them. Ensure that my style and tone are appropriate and consistent so that this feels like a cohesive experience, even if that's on a subconscious level. And then ensure that the content is structured in an intuitive and consistent way so that we know what we're getting into. So, what is a content style guide? Raise your hand if your organization has a content style guide. 3, 4, perfect. Raise your hand if your organization has a design style guide. Oh, less hands than I thought. Okay. Usually, design style guides tend to be big because they're branding and you paid a bunch of stuff for marketing. Content style guides are less popular, and mostly because, I'll define it first. So a content style guide is an organized set of rules of writing for your organization. These rules uphold your organization's voice, your style, your messaging, and make sure that if you're writing an article and you're writing an article and you're writing an article, you all sound like the same organizational voice, and that it's not all split. Okay? The reason that these don't get done is because, and I think this is my next slide, yes, content style guides are homework. Okay? No one likes homework. Visual style guides are fun, they're sexy, everybody wants to be in the design meeting. If you've ever booked a stakeholder design meeting, everybody hits yes on that event thing right away, right? Book a meeting to discuss content style guides, you'd be lucky if people show up. Because we are going to be talking about grammar, we're going to talk about punctuation, we're going to talk about title case versus sentence case. It's not as fun, but it needs to be done, and it's going to really pay off dividends for your organization. So, you're thinking, okay, you've convinced me. I might want a content style guide. This might be a good idea. I don't know where I can start or have little to no resources. Beg, borrow, and steal. Hooray for open source. So, if you are a very large informational organization, a great place to beg, borrow, and steal from is Canada.ca. The Canadian government has built out this massive content style guide. Maybe a little much, but okay. You can go in there and take some content in there in terms of how to standardize things. This is one resource. The one I like better is from the University of Dundee. So in the UK, there has been this massive content strategy wave. I envy anyone working in the UK in content strategy right now because all of the new stuff is coming out of there. People are working very cohesively. Content strategists are getting big budgets on projects because they've seen the value that they bring to them. The University of Dundee Style Guide is really great. It's broken down into 4 content areas. They're all quite short with the exception of the reference guide. And this is something that if you and your team sat down, 2 or 3 of you could probably produce in a week or 2. Okay? You're just looking to hit the high notes of standardizing your content. So I'm going to break down these 4 concepts for you. So We have our content principles, which is an overview of how your organization writes. This one's going to make sense after we cover the other three. It's kind of like back in high school English, which I used to be a high school English teacher. You used to like write your body paragraphs and go back and write your introduction, right? Because now you kind of know where they're all coming from. Same with your content principles. So it's an overview, the high notes of how you write, right? You have your writing guidelines, so your best practices for content creation. We have a few sample pieces of writing. Your voice and tone, which I will cover the difference because you might not remember. And then your reference guide. Your reference guide is dry. It's like, this is our date formatting. This is how you properly write the name of every single degree at this school. This is how we, all that stuff, all the simple stuff. So, content principles. First thing you want to do is define your audience. If your site has multiple personas, multiple users, define them. General public is not a user. Repeat after me. General public is not a user. You have to find segments within that group that you are trying to reach. If you're trying to talk to everybody, you are talking to nobody. Define your users, figure out who they are, potentially even include high-level stories in your content style guide, but then it might get too big. Then you have sort of your three overarching content statements, where if you have a content author who's referencing your style guide, they're not going to read the whole thing, but you just want them to come away with 3 little nuggets. Okay? This is how we as an organization write. So they might be some simple statements like, keep it fun, if that's your voice and tone. It might be, keep it simple, but don't patronize. If you just had to give sort of guiding principles. And that's it for the first section. The next is voice and tone. So voice and tone get tricky. Voice is your fixed personality. So I'm going to pick on Dave here for a second. So Dave's personality doesn't change every day because he's Dave. Okay. So I might say that Dave, and actually go to the next slide for a second, and then I'll come back. When you're making voice statements, it's really easy to sort of do this but not this statements. So I have to think about Dave. I think about Dave as like intelligent but not pedantic. Right? So he's not going to like...
Little pedantic.
You're a little pedantic, but I was trying to be nice. But and if you're writing for your organization, if you want to have that intelligent tone, you don't want to be so intelligent that you're like being too exclusive and you're blocking people out, right? So that's your fixed personality. So you can come up with one of those, this but not this statements. It's going to help you get your voice as an organization. Your tone changes depending on the specific interaction or situation. So how Dave is going to present in a conference versus speaking to his grandma versus speaking to his 5-year-old child are all going to be very different. In the context of a web style guide, those different tone changes might happen on the type of content type that you're using or the platform that you're posting to. How you're going to post on Facebook versus how you're going to post in terms of a information article on your site are going to be very different. And that's where you establish your tone, but your voice doesn't change. Because as an organization, you want to remain consistent. Cool?
So it changes according to channel and what?
Channel and content type. Okay. Generally. These are like high-level general rules. Okay. Cool. We did this one? Awesome. And tone. Ooh, so for tone can sometimes be hard to lock down. These are by no means the only way to establish tone, but this was a workshop that I went to that I really liked. If you're struggling with tone, take these 5 A/B statements and pick one of each. So if you're writing a Facebook post, it's probably personable, accessible, enthusiastic, funny, and conversational. Okay? That's probably your tone for that one. Then that information article I was referring to is probably still maybe personable, accessible, matter of fact, serious, and formal. Okay? So pick any one of those. And we will post all these slides because I see you guys all feverishly taking notes. Okay? But this is, and again, tone can go much beyond this, but this is an easy framework if you're struggling. Okay? All right. Rolling forward. And then in your content style guide, what you can do is you can take those channels and those content types, your types of writing, say the audience that you're trying to reach, the tone, they use a different, this is from the University of Dundee again, they didn't use that 5 structure that I showed before. Like your tone, and then like a couple sentences, so your content authors can refer to them and go, oh, that's what you mean. Because that's all how we learn. We need to see examples. Perfect. Writing guidelines. This is where things get a little bit drier. You're starting to get into the technicalities of writing. Active versus passive voice. The answer to that 99.9% of the time should be active. Active. First second or third person. This one comes up a little bit more often. Second person not rarely has a place. That's not true. No, on the web they're about even in terms of I, you, or they, in terms of how you're speaking to your audience. Header guidelines, sentence case, title case, the debate goes on. Paragraph guidelines, are you comfortable with long chunks of text? Do you want them to be shorter? You expect topic sentences, depends on what you're going with. And examples of well-written pieces of each kind of copy. And last but not least, as I mentioned, you have your reference guide. So you have your formatting expectations. So date and time, abbreviations and acronyms, how those are supposed to be handled, numbers, money, ages. This is a big one in multilingual, right? Think about commas versus periods and decimals. Money symbols, in English they go in the front, in French they go at the end, and establishing all those. Punctuation, for example, I think it's University of Dundee, this one don't quote me on, but they sort of have like a no complicated punctuation rule. No semicolons, no dashes, hyphens are fine. But essentially if you wouldn't, most of us are more comfortable, like even if we're more intelligent, we're comfortable reading at like a grade 8, grade 9 level. So where we can just read something and get it and we're fine. We don't have to like really focus. So if you kind of think about bringing your writing to that level, sometimes that can help. But it depends on your organization and you need to define that. Cool. So back to my Scott references. You decide to get on board with my Kool-Aid and you make a content style guide. And it's 4 pages long and you're excited and you love it as much as I do. But then a couple weeks later, you've sent it out into the universe and no one cares at all. No one is as much of a grammar nerd as you are, and you're upset about it. And you're like, how did this happen? I put so much work into it. The secret is, as much as you need to create that document as a starting point, you need to put your content style guide into the CMS. If it's not right there beside content authors while they're producing content, the odds of them using it are next to none. I am a rare breed of human being who cares about these things. Most content authors aren't going to care that much about punctuation usage, title case, sentence case, but if you can whisper in their ear while they are doing their content, then you're more likely to have it happen how you want it to. So, full confession, how this presentation was born. I'm at work one morning, I'm investigating this new tool, Gather Content. Raise your hand if you've heard of Gather Content. Only a couple people. Okay, it is, like, their marketing is off the charts. It's incredible. They sold me their Kool-Aid, it was great. It's essentially this content operations hub where you can look at all of these different workflows. It's really beautiful UX, streamlined. There's collaborative authoring, sort of like Google Docs. You can maintain consistent content by having these like blocks with help text. And there's a custom creation and publications workflow where you can notify people. It's a really, really neat tool. I'm super excited. And I called Dave over to my desk. I'm like, Dave, have you seen this thing? It's so cool. I want to go past the free trial. I want to think about using this for clients. And Dave turned to me and said,
it's like, we can probably build most of this in Drupal. Drupal already does most of these things.
Yeah, just nobody bothers, okay? Drupal core does a lot of gather content. Less pretty, I'm gonna put that on the table, okay? But a lot of it's there, and just not the way we usually configure Drupal. So, we have these templates, just go back one slide. You have these templates in gather content. I know it's hard to see, the next slide will blow it up, but you essentially create this like content block, and then you're able to give the content author guidelines. So you're able to say how many characters you want. You're able in the settings to say like this has to be an H1 or any sort of establishment. And then if you go to the next slide, because it's just a blow up of these. So this text is the same, I just put it up here. You can literally like whisper in your content author's ear and say, make this an H1, I want you to capitalize any initials, an exciting update from the energy company team, keep it short and sweet, and use adjectives like exciting to make it seem exciting. So you're leading the content author through the process. And there's another example on the next slide. So you're saying, maximum 2 sentences. This is going to sit under the headline so they contextually know where they're writing for. Because as we move from this like print mindset to a digital mindset, it takes content authors a really long time to understand that they can't think about their webpage like a piece of paper. Like it takes a long time to get that in their head, so you can guide them through this here. So the secret sauce is help text. I have dragged you here today to talk about help text, which is like not exciting, but is actually really exciting. So a simple way to support content authors is to create a better user experience through actually filling out your help text. So I'm going to throw it over to Dave here to pick it up, which is another Scott reference, to talk about implementation for you guys. Cool.
All right. So, luckily, like we said, Drupal already has almost everything we need. But unfortunately, this is generally not how we design Drupal sites at all. And it's not really how we think about content or content model in Drupal. So, go to the next one. So the first thing that we really need to do is think about our content model, our data model, and designing the content, or designing the data that we're going to store for the content. So this is the first step to bringing the content style guide. The first step is bringing the content style guide into the actual data model and then what we're creating in terms of the content types in Drupal. So we need to create fields and content types that reflect the content that the site's going to create. And the trick for this is to avoid what Drupal loves, which are really generic fields that don't offer any guidance to what goes in them. So a great example of fields that offer no guidance is body. The body field is the field you get by default when you create a new content type in Drupal. And in terms of writing content, it's basically useless. It doesn't tell you anything about the kind of content that needs to go in there. A way we could make this more useful and take the content style guide and then leverage the content style guide to actually make the authoring experience better in Drupal, to use it to guide the users into how you write whatever that kind of content is in the first place, is we break that up, break up the fields into the components that we want our content to have. So here's an example of our narrative content type, where
Which
you're
is
going to write.
Actually the hero's journey, which I did not know that Adam was going to talk about this morning. But this is the hero's journey, in case you were curious.
It's more than that. This is basically how every story is written. And you could say, this content type, you tell a story. And then you could sort of have two fields, the title of the story, and then all of your text. But it's a lot more intuitive, if you're writing this thing, to have fields that look like over here. So our content type, good narrative, where we have a field for introduction, a field for the inciting incident, a field for the crisis, a field for climax, and a field for resolution. Go to the next one.
Yep.
The next step is on these fields, we can attach, because these fields aren't generic now, we can attach help text that is actually helpful. It's very difficult to write good help text for the body field, other than this is the text that appears on the page. Not much of a guide there. But with the other fields, we can actually provide real guidance on the kind of information and the kind of limitations that we'd like, and the kind of content we'd like the authors to write for those fields. So, for example, I was going to read the other one. But for example, like inciting incident, this is the moment where something goes wrong in the story, and the protagonist of the story goes on a type of journey to right that wrong. So what would have just been the body field, we now give some guidance on how you actually write for that field. So the next thing that we can really leverage to bring this into Drupal for more complex fields is paragraphs. And how many of you are familiar with paragraphs? Like everybody, that's amazing. All right, so paragraphs are a really, really powerful way to create sort of useful chunks of content for things that need to sort of stay grouped together. And it lets you create sort of a structure for a subcomponent and then fill that with guides as well for how to fill them out. So if you have a paragraph type that's a fun fact, that you want people to embed fun facts all over their piece of content they're writing, you can require right away that fun fact has a fact with some guidance of how to put the fact, and then require a source so that all your fun facts need to be sourced. And so you can even enforce things out of your style guide by bringing it into the content management system. So this is a tweet that I love that went out recently from Jeff Eaton. I don't know who needs to hear this right now, but we'll use paragraphs isn't a content model. So it sure isn't. You can also leverage paragraphs to just make generic things that are, great in their own way, but not that helpful for content authors. So it's something to keep in mind. So the trick for paragraphs, like I was saying, is to create meaningful chunks of small content that you can guide the author through the experience. So let's take a look. So we built a website to leverage these things and to see if we could sort of take the lessons that we'd learned and actually build a Drupal site with it. So here we have the Why Can't We Be Friends, our ultimate ska fan page. The theme that I chose to use is Barktic, which is the theme that comes with Drupal 8. We've customized it very heavily by changing the color to pink. But this is just a very few styles on top of Barktic. And I wanted to use Barktic because if we can do it in Barktic, you can do it in any other theme. the bare minimal to entry.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at a piece of content.
Start with the band page?
Start with the band page?
Yeah, start with the band page. So I'll just, like a little tour from from the public facing side. So, this didn't need to be Wikipedia. Wikipedia already exists. It was just sort of like, we had a joke that this was like the website I wanted when I was 15. So I just want to rope you into my world of loving ska as much as me. So we're just going to give you 3 little facts about each band, but I want to make sure that they're well sourced. I want to make sure that you can deep dive into Wikipedia if I hook you. And then I'm just going to link to YouTube and a few things. But I do want to make sure that I have that source connection that Dave was talking about before for all my fun facts, so that references are, not just all things on the internet are true, said Abraham Lincoln sort of style. The things are there. And then also, if we have articles.
Yeah, let's go to articles.
Yeah. Which are sort of more like these sort of newspaper style concepts. This does just look like one giant body field when it is delivered to the user. But Dave's going to show you very shortly that for the writing experience, it's very different. Is that enough context?
That's perfect.
Okay.
So these are all just standard Drupal fields with some paragraphs, and we've added some styles to make the help text huge and take up some space just on the side there. And that's literally the only thing we've changed. There's no code. It's just some styles to make the help text bigger. And then we've made good help text. So we've set this up to sort of guide who's ever writing this through the authoring experience. We have a title that's required. You have to choose a hero image with some instructions on how you actually fill out alternate text, which is very helpful for content authors because writing accessible texts for images is not something people naturally know how to do, but it is something that you can guide them for. And so here we have the introduction. So all of the different sections of this article are paragraphs. So you can put in quotes, or you can put in paragraphs, and you can have as many as you want, and you can reorder them. We also have help text for explaining what goes into this section. So this is the introduction. Then you can get into the inciting incident, which is more of the same. And then as you see, it sort of guides you through the actual creation of this.
What was really interesting for me is when me and Dave were prototyping this, the first content type that we had here was introduction, conflict resolution, or something to that. It was like a 3-part narrative. And so I wrote the first article, and then Dave inevitably makes things better, and I go back and I'm like, I gotta rewrite my article. I gotta go fill in my boxes and making more work for me. And it was such a better article. I am weirdly proud of this piece of writing because it evolved so well by being supported by and I'm even the one who created the help text, right? But you don't always listen to yourself until it's there right beside you. And I went through, and because I had to isolate the inciting incident, I had to expand it and make it clearer. And I know for your organizations, the odds of you writing narratives are unlikely, right? But it's an overarching content type that we can all relate to because we're wired for narrative. If anybody's been watching any of the big TED Talks right now, we're narrative is just out there. So it's a good relational point, but you might start thinking about a piece of content that you're supposed to be repeating in your organization, but people aren't, right? And just because you got to create that whispering in their ear so that while they're doing it, even the people who know how to do it don't always do it. They really need that support system there as they're writing.
Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, even if you don't have a content style guide for everything, there's certain things that do. I was recently working on a project where there is a specific field which was a summary, which is going to get used in this specialized list. So it had some specialized rules. And they were discussing, because the content authors in the previous system would basically paste their entire paper there and be like, yep, that's the summary. And they're like, well, what do we do? Maybe we can restrict it to 255 characters, or maybe we do this or all this. And really like all this sort of expensive functionality that would need to get implemented to try and do this. But really, because I've been through building this site, the answer was sort of obvious. Why don't we just tell them what we want them to write in this box? Which hadn't been done before. And I think it's going to work out great. Saved a whole lot of money either way.
Yeah, and the other part of this talk that I've forgotten to integrate up to this point is that usually the people who know what the help text could be don't actually get to go to the development meetings. There's this giant disconnect, right? In terms of like, there are people in the organization who know what that help text should look like, but they rarely get to speak to the developers, be part of those meetings. So if you can think in your organization, like, who do I need to sit around a table? Just so that these people can meet the technical backend people, give them a day to sort of go in and add the help text, or see about some like a custom module. We worked on something shortly after our last Montreal presentation.
Oh, I guess we should,
yeah, you can throw it up after the end of the presentation, but just giving a point of access for content authors who might be higher in the communications chain to go in and put that help text. And I'll also clarify, like Davis themed this out, but if you're using Drupal core, the help text is teeny tiny and it's light gray and it is sort of hard to find. But a tiny bit of theming can make the huge change for your organization.
And it's still not that bad. There's sort of the funny thing is after building this and writing in it, and I'm not really a person that does a lot of creative writing, but writing content when it sort of tells you how like what needs to go places and gives you those restrictions is so much easier. And I actually laughed out loud that when the first time after working on this, where I went back to just another Drupal site where it's title body and I had to write something, and I got so angry. And then I just had to laugh. I just had to laugh at myself about like really how much harder that we'd all been making writing content in our content management system, like for ourselves. That how much harder we've been making it for ourselves for just no reason, because the tools are there, except for one.
We'll talk about the title in a second.
Yeah.
And I think so often in a development sphere, we think of like handing over a box to the client. It's like, okay, client, fill the box, go nuts. And then you end up having to like backwards go fix. It's like, oh, we actually needed these fields, and we actually needed. If you can establish like what your help text is going to be for your content types up ahead of time, you'll probably notice that body's not going to cut it, right? If you're thinking about how we're going to instruct content authors through that process early on, it'll help you expand out your content types early in the definition phase, and you're less likely to need to revise them. Do you want to talk about titles?
We'll talk about titles. All right, so this is sort of fun. So I mean, all of us have most of us here have probably configured Drupal sites. Does Drupal core support help text on title fields? No, some people know. Yes, that's absolutely right. It does not. I was sure it did, and was shocked to find out it didn't for this. But luckily, there is a module for that. No title help text. Luckily, it has a really easy to find name. So for this site that we built, we actually only needed 2 contrib modules, because like we were saying, Drupal does most of it. It's all about leveraging the tools we have to sort of create a much better experience. So this demo site just uses 2 contrib modules, paragraph and no title help text, so that we could do that. And then sort of designing content types so that the content types walked you through writing the content that we wanted you to write. And then paragraphs for when there were sort of specific divisions of fields that needed to go together to sort of turn even those sub pieces of content into sort of guides of how to write them.
I think that's it.
I think that's it too. All right, well, are there any questions? Yeah. That's fine.
She's
Yeah.
So, when we're talking about content authors, how do you manage multiple authors? Like, you have to have multiple content creators for the same piece.
I have two follow-up questions, because my answer is different depending on your answer to them. Are you talking about a content migration situation where you're bringing in a task force to get a massive undertaking done, and then it's going to be scaled back? Or are you talking about a fully distributed content model where you have a whole bunch of people who have access to the CMS constantly?
Yes.
You cannot say yes to both of those things. Here's what I'm going to say. A lot can be done with roles and permissions in terms of giving people drafting rights but not publishing rights. So that's a great way to sort of, you have this content author role where all they're going to get is this themed version of the node, help text, made huge. They're able to put a node into draft, and then somebody higher up in the comms team is actually going to go and check it, proof it, make sure that it works.
So it doesn't come across as track changes, it just comes across as a note on the right?
It just comes out as
Like a comment?
not as a comment. They would actually be revising it fully. This is not a track change situation.
So, like, this is just how you're going to lay out your content model for your content. Any of your moderation or workflows that you have can still go on top of it just as is. So if you already have an editorial workflow, that will port just fine whether your fields you're editorializing are just a giant body or whether there's some more specific things.
Right. So in other words, you're suggesting that perhaps the editorial process would still be outside of the content management system like in Word, and then once you have something, then go from there?
Hopefully not, because the more we can get content authors out of Word, the better.
So this is to change content authors' mindset and how they write content. So this is, because writing in Word has the same problem as writing into a giant text area. And it's that they're not going to listen to your style guide. You need to force them to adhere to the style guide while they're writing. And if you're going to do that, you need to make the writing experience better. And the way you can make the writing experience better is by giving guidance and turning writing into sort of an abstract thing, into more of a form, so they can, because writing for work is not necessarily as satisfying. So you want to let them do it faster and sort of break it through, and that's the way you're going to give a better experience to the author in the CMS and not in Word. And then, I mean, you still need to make sure that you've designed your CMS so that that kind of thing is supported, so they can have draft articles that aren't going to go anywhere. But
what you're getting at with track changes and stuff, though,
Right.
we're not. I'm going to be completely honest. We're not covering here. I have work that I'm doing with another client right now where it's in the workflows and the roles and permissions where they get something through the fully drafting process, they get it published, but if they start a revision on it, they're able to keep the old version live, rework it, and then plug it in when they're ready. But that's a separate thing.
Okay, now what about when we were discussing migration?
Yes. So I'm doing this actually with a very large organization right now. Next Thursday, I have to go in and train 40 people who are not web writers at all to just sort of help with this massive, both migration and new content creation for this new site that we're deploying. Generally, my 3 high points that I want to cover with content authors who are part of a task force who are just coming in for a large effort up front is covering dynamic versus static web, because we still think about websites as pages. It took me a year to get print media out of my head as I entered the tech world. So getting people to really understand that you can't think about layout, that's the designer's job. So training them on that front. 2, writing for the web, if nothing else, just get them to understand the importance of headers in terms of scanning for content and accessibility, right? Because we know our headers create that phone tree effect for people using a screen reader. And then, in all honesty, that content style guide I just gave you, if you get a task force, you got to limit down to what you can. I'd give them sort of the high-level content principles, probably a few of the writing guidelines to get them to focus in on those. And then realistically, all of these people are only going to be in draft mode. You got to have 2-3 people at the top on the publishing chain who are the ones who are looking this over, make sure it functionally works, and reworking it a bit. And if what gets turned out is a total disaster, it gets pitched back to the task force. It is not that person's job to rework it completely. It has to go back down the chain. And the reason you do it this way is to create that digital transformation in the organization. What I'm also doing with them is that we're running content clinics weekly. So I'll be meeting with the client in 4-hour chunks once a week. I am there as a resource to sit down with anybody doing writing and help them through the process. And rather than doing training for like their 2 comms people and they become the only points, it's gonna be grunt work. It's going to suck, but they're gonna be so much better for it on the other side of it, because they're gonna have 20, 30 content authors who know enough to get by. Does that answer your question?
Not completely,
yeah.
but
I think I know what you're saying, because you're probably doing an automatic migration where you're lifting all your content and dumping it into the new system.
not gonna happen.
No.
So
It's still under review.
it's still under review. So In that situation, yeah, you need this. You can't really change the model that much because you're just taking your content and moving it. But if you're doing a content audit, I mean, most of it's going to need to be rewritten and audited.
Depends.
So, sorry, well.
No, not quite. We're almost there at the end.
Sure.
Okay.
So in other words, in terms of, like, you could configure it to introduce this, like you do your migration, and then configure it for, like, the authoring aspect, but that would come after, right? Okay, we're good.
Okay.
I'm
So-
ready.
Ruth?
Have you come across any resources or content style guides that specifically address cognitive impairments? Because I had
No.
the experience of seeing one where honestly there were, most of the guide was written in words that were more than 10 characters. It was just ridiculous.
I can't say for sure. My best, off the top of my head, gov.uk is actually super transparent about their content strategy approach, and some of the biggest research coming out of content strategy is coming out of gov.uk, like the UK government, straight up.
Yeah.
If you type in gov.uk content strategy in Google and check their accessibility, if anybody has it, it's them.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else? Nothing? All right.
Well, I think
That
we're-
was fun.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank you
guys.
very much.